Welcome to Fairfield Public Access Television. I'm Susan Kessel, and I'm here today with two very creative people. I'm excited to introduce to you Kelsey Mullen and Mark Schaefer, who you all know. We're here and we're going to talk a little bit about Barhydt Chapel and conserving and preserving some of the features in it that possibly could be used in the Jefferson County Civic Center, a project that is proposed for Fairfield that's been dreamed about and a vision for a very long time. I'm on the board, as are 10 other members, and we have moved to a time when we're talking to Kelsey Mullen, who is an architect, to be. And he lives in Fairfield. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, how long you've lived here?
I've been in Fairfield since 1984, and participated in the architecture program at Iowa State and graduated there a couple years ago, and was practicing architecture in Denver, Colorado, and about a year ago moved back to Fairfield and got involved with Susan and the board and the Civic Center.
Kelsey actually is my daughter Stacy's age. But he's a very talented, nice young man, and we are excited to have him working on this project. And like you said, you did for your, what do you call it, when you were going to school, you took on the Civic Center as a project.
We called it thesis. It's a fifth-year project, and they give you the freedom after years of telling you what to design to do whatever project you want to do in your final year. And for my thesis, I took on the Civic Center.
And that is how we originally met you. I should say that it was during that time that we also had Martha Bell, who I went to school with, and a very good friend and daughter of Dorothy Bell, wonderful, wonderful, talented architect with a firm in Chicago. And she gave us a lot of time and input and did, what do you call that when you're getting all the questions, the programming for us, and met with people from our community, gave us a lot of time, traveled back and forth, and we are ever grateful to Martha Bell for doing that for us. And then things rapidly changed. We became discouraged, and we have been meeting as a Civic Center group for a number of years, monthly, and then even more than once a month. And finally, when Kelsey did move back, he expressed his interest in helping us again, and for free. And then you introduced us to Mark Bowers
Mark Bowers, and he owns a firm in Denver, Colorado called Architectural Workshop. I worked with Mark when I was out there, and proposed to the Civic Center that Mark and I team up and become the architects for the Civic Center.
And things have progressed, and we've been working hard and doing lots of things behind the scenes and continue. And Barhydt is happening right now too. And so we thought, what a wonderful idea if we could incorporate some things from Barhydt Chapel. If it's going to have to be torn down, let's help preserve some of the features. And so that is our concern, and what we're trying to do, and we're going to brainstorm here a little. But I have to say that even though we are making the effort to conserve some of these pieces, they might not necessarily be included in the Civic Center because they won't work, they're impractical, a lot of different reasons.
There are a lot of reasons that some of the elements may not be used, but at this point we don't want to regret not taking advantage of some elements that later on won't be at our disposal or be able to be utilized. And so I guess today, as we have been, we'll be walking through and, just like you said, brainstorming so that we can see anything and everything that we could possibly use in a new construction.
And I know one major thing is the pipe organ, which MUM has offered to pay for the removal and the crating up and storage, and that'll be done by John Connett, who's a wonderful person that we taped a show with the other day. And it is hoped that we can have that in our Civic Center but boy, that's a very big, unusual item, and it might not work. But if it can, that would be wonderful.
It just becomes a design issue, and it becomes something like that would become labor of love. And if
Yeah.
it's something that we really want to put into this building, we can do it, or the whole organ or portions of the organ. But the important thing is that we're working on preserving it for the long term.
Right. So it will be kept in the community no matter what. And as we look around here, Mark, I don't know if you knew that some of this was in this bad a shape. We're upstairs in the balcony.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty rocky. We have sections of plaster that have fallen, and in a minute, I think Kelsey's going to point out a structural member over here that is literally falling apart. I mean, the wood is just falling off. Moldings that replicate the cast concrete structural piers down below. But yeah, it's seen better days.
Yes. So tell us about this, and we're going to walk around and brainstorm about things and why we can't use them, why we think we might, what they could be used for. Like I said, we've got two very creative people here, Mark and Kelsey.
Well, what you're looking at now is some pretty severe water damage done to one of the columns that's replicating the piers, the columns that are down in the nave that we'll look at in a minute here. But as you can see, as it's fallen apart, you can see exactly how it was built, which helps in replicating something like this for later construction. But this damage is irreversible and something that really needs some attention.
We did take an inventory one day, Tom Stanley and Ken Norton, myself and Kelsey, and we took photos and we inventoried things that we thought possibly could be saved. And we counted how many windows?
38 windows, including the two large 2.5, 3-story windows in the transept.
And we talked about we want to save all the windows, but some of them are in bad shape and might not be able to use, but maybe salvaged for pieces for the other. And I should mention that Ron Bovard in Fairfield, very well known throughout the country for his stained glass work, has offered very generously to remove all the windows and store them for us for free. So thank you, Ron Bovard. And
That's a big chunk. I mean, that's an incredible gift right there.
that is wonderful to have that, and that makes it possible for us to do this.
Exactly.
So,
One thing I'd like to say before I forget, when Ankeny Hall burned in 1902, that was a real big setback for Parsons College. It had been remodeled, I think, in the 1880s and was the main building. Ballard Hall had just been built the year before in 1901. And Parsons was, about 30 years old at that time, and experiencing growing pains and hoping to expand and so forth. So, their main building goes up in flames, and I think all they saved was the typewriter from the president's office. It wasn't a whole lot to go on. So they knocked out partitions in Ballard Hall, which was built as a girls' dorm, and used that for classroom space, as well as the Hen Mansion was, of course, here. But one of the references that Susan Welty makes in her book, Fairfield, is that even though this disastrous thing visited itself upon the college, it precipitated a building boom in the next 10 years that made this building possible, as well as some of the other buildings that have since been torn down. And I guess my hope is, even though this is really hard to let go of, I have dealt with
part of you.
Yeah, I've dealt with a lot of anger on this, as well as have a lot of people in town. However, this is maybe something leading to something bigger and better, and will give Fairfield a new lease on life that it badly needs. And certainly, any of these elements that can be utilized in a new civic center will give it an integrity that links the civic center with its history, the history of the community, as well as giving it a design integrity that will make it quite unusual and set it apart from any other theatrical setting that you'll find in Southeast Iowa, certainly, and maybe in the Midwest.
I totally agree, and that is our hope and desire of the Civic Center Board, that in addition to being a wonderful asset to the community, in the downtown community, and revitalizing Fairfield, that we'll be able to incorporate portions of Barhydt and preserve some of our heritage. So we'll take a break and move downstairs. We're on the stairs coming down from the balcony, and we are noticing the railing, and it does have a little pattern to it, but this is probably not salvageable because it is not up to code.
Yeah, one of the issues when you're trying to, let's say, either move a building or remodel a building is that it's then subject to codes. And one of the issues I noticed when walking up here was this handrail in particular is too short. We're short by possibly 6 inches here. This is one element that would need to be changed so that it would be up to code, along with electrical systems and bathrooms, and it just goes on.
Handicap, accessibility.
Is headroom an issue here?
This is okay for me.
Yeah, headroom is a bit of an issue for me, and then I think that this might be considered also, and it would be considered in code, especially coming down the stairs, because most of us have to duck.
Yeah.
Right.
And now I might mention, upstairs, with some of the water damage, the white paint has peeled, and you can see that this was originally a natural finish.
Okay.
So, there might be
I was
somebody
going
that
to
would...
say lead paint or something.
Well,
Yeah.
probably. But, if there was somebody out there that wanted some nice pieces of oak, this would make a nice, for a domestic setting, this might make a nice railing for somebody's home.
Right. And we'll move downstairs further.
Now, we've been joking around about duct tape here, and one of the windows is held together. We could do a 3M commercial or something, but anyway, this shows the precarious condition here again that the windows are in, and that duct tape didn't even hold. One of those pieces fell down. But these are nice little windows. They're tall, narrow. They would be perhaps in the Civic Center setting. It could be a lighted panel. Like
And
an
we
indirect lighting in the
have
wall.
talked about some windows being maybe inside and not exposed to the weather, and we're not sure yet.
Like a glass partition.
Sure.
That was certainly popular during the Tiffany era. I know the White House, I don't know if it's the Grant administration, but back in there somewhere, maybe 1880s, had the Tiffany studios make a big stained glass partition for the front hall of the White House. And of course, that's been taken out years ago, but that is a design element that's a possibility.
Right. And I know when Tom and Ken and I met here, and with Kelsey, we're throwing all kinds of ideas at him. Oh, we could save this, and we can do this, and we can do that, and he's the one that has to put it all together. So might not work.
But like even the front doors, they look bad from the outside. The veneer is peeling, but they appear to be sound. You could re-veneer the outside, perhaps. The inside is very attractive. The finish is still good, and certainly those fixed panels on either side of the double door are nice.
My hope is that maybe even if we can't use these for the Civic Center because of code and everything else, but maybe someone will get them. I have a lot of old doors in my home that I enjoy, and they were a real headache to my contractor. They didn't like me.
One thing I'd
but
like to point out, excuse me, did you finish that thought?
yeah, but I used them anyway.
That's all right. Well, those contractors, they're being paid. If the camera would go over to this little, what's left of maybe an altar rail, I'm not sure what
Okay.
this is. This looks like it's a piece of the original fabric of the interior. It might have just been a kneeler, I don't know. But you can see some Gothic, remains of some Gothic fretwork there in the corners. It's obviously been chopped off somehow, but
There has been some vandalism. I know John Connett, when he was talking about the pipe organ, talked about actual pipes that were missing, and some have shown up and some not. And so,
and we had talked in the other show, we had talked about the doors here from the narthex, the entry that leads into the nave. I don't know, Kelsey, do you think these are original doors, or are these 1960s rehashes of what might have been?
Well, I don't know. They don't exactly look original, but it's hard to say.
But I think the hardware,
The hardware I
The
was
brass-
just looking at.
the
and
brass is nice.
Yeah, it is. It's very nice, and I don't know.
it
It's
doesn't
nice,
feel
but
like wood.
It's hard to say. It's hard to say. These don't look original, actually. Now that the closer I get, the hardware is very nice. And so if there are elements that we do want to save, these are things that we look at.
And of course, the original hardware on the front doors are gone because it now has modern push bars, probably for security and code reasons. But certainly some of these things could be reutilized without too much trouble.
Right. And like I said, we are happy that the Civic Center has been able to act to just help save some of these pieces, even if we aren't going to use them. They can be maybe acquired by someone in the community. I'm not sure yet how that will work out, and we are grateful that MUM is letting us do this and helping pay for the organ to be removed and stored.
Yeah, Kelsey, you want to talk about some of these structural members, these cast, what we think are cast concrete piers, structural elements?
Yeah, if you look at these columns here in the arcade of the side aisle, it's one recognizable element that we've talked about preserving or recreating, and I've come in and done some measurements and taken a closer look at these columns and realized that they were not actually wood like the columns that we saw previously upstairs, but they're actually cast in place structural members. And so what I've done is taken measurements to eventually recreate them, possibly in the Civic Center.
Possibly
In the Civic Center. And the reason for recreation instead of reusing them is simply because they are so massive, being all concrete, that we may end up destroying them trying to get them out of here.
Yeah, and
let alone
there's no way of knowing how they're anchored
Yeah.
into the sub-basement and so forth.
let alone the fact that they are structure for the building, and once you start taking those out, then basically most of the building needs to be gone by the time you're taking something like that out. So it would be easier to just recreate them, but they're very beautiful. They're very
I know
beautiful.
that was one thing that I was saying, oh, I want one of these. I want one of these. I'd love to have one of these in my house.
Sure.
Let's save these.
And
But
with the dimensions, it's easy enough to recreate the column and the arches.
And they're pretty simple. I mean, they're very elegant, but they're blocky, and there's not a lot of sculpted foliage or anything. So
Right.
it's a kind of stylized, modified acanthus capital, perhaps. I don't know. Yeah, and I want to mention this before we forget too. If you look above those structural columns, you'll see sort of a zigzag element that goes under the windowsills and then jogs up and across and then down again. And that replicates the stonework that you see on the outside of the church to a degree. And Kelsey, you had some really highfalutin sounding assessment of that, so you want to share?
Well, one thing I noticed was that all of the interior walls of the chapel, Barhydt Chapel, replicate or are the exterior walls. And so what you see from the inside is actually what you see from the outside and vice versa. So the outside actually defines the interior volume. And so a lot of what you see in here, the columns and the shields with the cross bracing, these are structural elements that are really holding this building together.
And let's, with the camera, let's take a look at those, the cross pieces. I know we've looked before, and we do want to, we talked about saving these. I know Ken Norton said, oh, let's save the light fixtures and the shields, and yeah, we want to, but what might happen?
Well, if we just start taking them out, then you can see that, basically the shields are the bottom side of the truss. And if you just start taking them out, then you'll have some pretty severe structural issues. And so saving some of these elements may be a little delicate, but there are people out there that do it, and so I'm sure we can figure it out.
And the same with the light fixtures. There are some that are in good shape, and like we said before, we're not sure the date, if these are fairly new from the 60s or if they're old. Would have to be investigated, but there are some that are not all there.
Yeah, if that milk glass is in fact plexiglass or something, well, that'll tell us that they're not old.
Mm-hmm.
And we were discussing off camera earlier as to whether or not the light fixtures would meet modern code, and it's very likely that they don't, and would actually be a fire hazard. So even rewired because of whatever
Right.
reason.
And I was mentioning that when we built our home, I saved a lot of old light fixtures, had some rewired and installed, and I loved them, and then they kept getting very hot and like almost melting, and I was worried about fire, so I've had some of them replaced. So it's not always practical.
But even if the fixtures per se were not incorporated, certainly the little fleur-de-lis ornamentation could be used somehow, or we talked about inverting them and having like a drop light inside, and just that be the decorative outer casing. With the shields, the escutcheon decoration in the middle, that's not just a cross brace, but there's also a vertical brace that goes to the ridgepole of the roof as well. So they're doing what a flying buttress would do on the outside of a more ornate Gothic structure.
And we've talked about the pews at our Civic Center meetings, and although they're not totally really attractive like old ones would be,
Well, and I noticed upstairs in the balcony there was a water-damaged pew. The cap was off the top, and you can see it has like a fiberboard core. So they're nothing to write home about in terms of high quality, but they have nice clean lines, and they would certainly be serviceable for some uses, I would think.
and there might be some area in our Civic Center that these would be usable, and we will save a number of them with the intent of that, but it might not work out or be practical.
Well, and certainly we'll try to save all the little brass nameplates like David and Bateman and all these other people that the pews are memorials to. I could see where you'd have a wall of remembrance where maybe the outside bronze plaques surrounded by these in a decorative.
Yes, we definitely have talked about the plaques. There's some major ones on the outside, and
And there are, like even on the sills under the windows, there's a plaque, an engraved plate to the first president, the first graduating class president, 1880, whatever his name was. Can't remember now.
don't remember. Well, these are certainly pieces that we don't want to just toss away.
And there are plates, engraved plates that are dedicated to the Parsons family, for which the college was named, and there's just a lot of little tidbits here that won't be hard to salvage. It'll take a couple hours to do it, but a few people with screwdrivers could make short work of it. So I imagine you'll be looking for volunteers at some point.
Yes, I'm sure we will. And for storage also. That's a major concern, because it will be a little while before we get started.
And inventory. It's always good to have things inventoried. So people that are good at organizing and keeping books.
That's one that I don't think we thought of.
Well, I usually don't think of those things, but I'm married to somebody that does, so some of it's rubbing off.
Oh, that's good. And the windows, we do like some of the windows, and we talked about, well, what about the religious content? And lots of times that doesn't matter. They're beautiful pieces of art. But that will be determined, and how many we have, and that'll be a hard one for Kelsey.
Well, it's always difficult when you're trying to reuse something, especially if it has religious iconography in it. But it's a sensitive issue, but it's something we'll approach and do respectfully, of course.
And religious or not, it's still a part of the community history, and I just think from that standpoint, I mean, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City has religious art up the wazoo, but it's not a religious organization, and it's supported by city money, I think. There certainly are city museums throughout the country and the world that have religious art as historic artifacts or beautiful works of art. So I think we're just at a point in our history right now where we're a little obsessive compulsive about all this
Yeah.
separation stuff, and it's like, give me a
Yeah.
break.
I think so. I agree too. For me, it's the art in the glass that's important, and saving that.
And, if we're expected to just turn off offensive television or avoid offensive movies, then people who are offended by this sort of thing can just not look at it. So, I mean, it works both ways.
Right. What are some other features that we've talked about?
Well, one of the things that we were talking about, not only recreating the side aisles and the arcade and the rhythm of the columns and the arches, was to recreate some of the some of the molding work around or around the windows that we end up reusing, or maybe elsewhere, some recognizable elements that would remind people of the Barhydt Chapel. And I think that some of the molding elements are really good, along with the fixtures and the shields, and possibly in theater, depending on design issues and such, reusing some of the pews, and but that depends on what we really want to do, and
Right.
it's just a design issue that comes down the road.
And these pews are 40 years old, and like I said, they have a fiberboard core, so I don't know how much more life they have.
Right.
So maybe a few pews, like in meeting rooms around the wall or something, might be appropriate, where they wouldn't get the heavy use that they might in a theater situation.
Right. Something
Right.
that's maybe suggestive, or just a remembrance. And then that's something we've also talked about, instead of being utilitarian in the long run.
I mean, this just came to mind. It's totally off the wall, perhaps, but just knocking the ends off and keeping the plates on the pew and have this sort of a decorative repeat pattern incorporated as a wall motif.
Creative
I mean,
minds.
it's like, I mean, it sounds really stupid, but it might work. Almost anything will work if you do it right.
Oh, right.
That's good.
We did toss around the idea of the name of Barhydt Gallery. The Fairfield Art Association lost its home over 5 years ago, and we were talking about a gallery space possibly in the lobby area, and then a studio space also, and for the Concert Association, and Fact Theater, and the many artists and musicians, and it goes on, and the civic area for business, and I know I'm leaving tons out, so I shouldn't even get started on that.
Well, and, you're talking about the different kinds of activities. There have been some famous voices that have sung in this chapel, and I couldn't tell you who they were, but just in hearing old Parsons people talk, they had guest concert artists come in, and of course during the summer festivals there were people that didn't necessarily perform here, but they performed in relation to Parsons College. I'm sure Louis Armstrong never played for homecoming in the Barhydt Chapel, but
He stayed at my parents' motel.
all right. So
know, he's here.
there you go. So the Bates Motel
Right.
hosted Louis Armstrong, but people of that stature made appearances on this campus, and kind of a hall of honor or a roster of honor or something would be nice in terms of the kinds of performers that
You
touch
dig
people's
out
lives.
some pictures and have them framed and somewhere, and we do have more new talent within our community and related to our community. I know Dorothy Bell's son is a wonderful oboist, I believe, that it's played in Carnegie Hall, and it would be.
with Pittsburgh Symphony still?
I think so.
He was with the Chicago Light Opera Company or something for a
I
while.
mean, that wonderful talent that we could bring back to Fairfield, Debbie Raymond, opera singer, wonderful people we can showcase when we have a civic center. So it's exciting, and it's going to happen.
How many organizations did you say? Was it 80 organizations that could
80
utilize
existing already Fairfield organizations that
Concert-
we've identified.
Concert Association, Art Association, the dance class, the dance
yes.
school. I mean, you go on and on. So
And Kelsey worked with us on a programming and interviewing these groups and people to find out what we need and how to do it. And
That was a pretty interesting process. We ended up with multiple groups that all had their ideas about basically what their wish list of a building like this would be. Multiple theater groups, and when you get into different types of theater, you get into different sizes of audiences, different types of stages. It was an interesting process, and to build something that is flexible enough to accommodate for everyone, that'll be interesting and fun.
well, and just as an example of how a person shifts gears, when we first talked about this, I came and talked to you in two capacities. One is for the Art Association, and another from the historical standpoint. And that was when we were right in the middle of the Loudon Machinery Company research project, getting the Loudon buildings in the National Register. and I was having ideas about sliding partitions that were on Loudon door track, and maybe even replicating a Loudon barn for the theater. Well, that's obviously out now, but I think there are little elements of Fairfield history. I think the door track idea, maybe in a more utilitarian setting like the Art Association, or the costume room, or the set building area, or the shop, or whatever you're going to call it. I think that would work because, I mean, that's industrial grade stuff, and even if it's 100 years old, it's still very workable. And I think those kinds of details, even in humble places like closets and storage rooms, would give our civic center an integrity and an interest that, I mean, tour groups could come and look at our closet. I mean, you can make your closets literally a tourist destination.
Well, we're going to incorporate as much as we can, but there again, it all comes down to what is practical.
Sure.
And
there's also long-range planning. I mean, there are ideas that I think could be implemented at a later time, or embellishments could be added as time goes on. It doesn't have to all be done at once.
Certainly.
I know that we even talked about the outside and the stone, and incorporating some of the stone from this building. It's really interesting, and we don't know if it was quarried from around here or not. I don't think we figured that out.
We haven't figured that out, but it's as everybody knows, it's beautiful stone. And when the building does eventually come down, it's an obvious resource. And so it's something we're looking into, either replicating on the building or around the building.
Or even in the landscaping, perhaps, a little water garden area, walkway, little fence. We want to use it if we can, and if it's going to work.
Well, and here again, the landscaper that was hired in 1905 to landscape the Parsons campus, if those plans or references to the specific plantings that he employed could be found, that would be another idea for landscaping. You could do a little miniature recreation of some of his ideas. And my guess that his work would be evocative of Frederick Law Olmsted that did Central Park in New York, the big landscape designer from...
The name sounds very
I don't remember.
familiar, but...
But my guess that there would be a connection there. That would be an interesting thing to look into. But here again, that thread of history that connects now with what happened, before is always a strong piece of input as far as I'm concerned.
It's a strong
Right.
reference, and it's something that if we have references, historical references in our building, then it's something that gives the building depth and something people can relate to, and adds to the experiential quality of the building. Something that we're working on doing.
Right.
No, I don't want to run anybody down. There is a neighboring community that has a very nice community facility that I frankly thought was their water treatment plant for many years.
I agree, and it is a wonderful and very well-used facility, but from the outside, it does.
And and that's real American, it's real Midwest, it's very practical. You don't want to get real frilly, you just get by with what you can get by with and be glad of it. But I think we need to set our sights a little higher, that something that's not only of functional merit, but also has artistic and aesthetic merit, something that will last the test of time. I think that's something we should shoot for.
I agree, and I think that represents a civic center's feelings.
Right.
And also the placement of where it will be in Fairfield, the surroundings will be considered, right?
Oh, absolutely. Context is a huge issue when you're designing a building, and it can't be necessarily a sore thumb in the fabric of its neighborhood. And so it would draw from the surrounding buildings and situations.
I know that when we were first talking about this, the Civic Center being out in the country or out by the fairgrounds, and you worked up some designs for us, they're totally going to be different.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's when you're dealing with, let's say, a prairie, or compared to an urban situation. Not only are you restricted by land, but you can't necessarily put a vertical building out on a prairie because it doesn't look that good. And that's where the prairie style came from. It was vertical, horizontal, and so the design will end up changing accordingly.
So that will be yet to be determined, and to incorporate parts of Barhydt if possible. And that will all be developing in the next several months.
Right.
And that's one of the ironies of the design of this building. I mean, this building was designed to last. It was designed to be evocative of a quaint English country church.
Mm.
It was designed, purposely set at an angle to true north to give it a more picturesque quality. And of course, that's one of the reasons that are being used to justify its demolition, not just because it's in bad shape, because it is in physically bad shape. Although I am fond of saying we rebuilt Dresden after World War II, which was flattened by Allied bombers. So we're not quite in that bad a shape here. But just the fact that we don't have a true east entrance in this building is also in, shall we say, philosophical conflict with the present owners. So even if you do have that connection with history in terms of the building style, it doesn't always hold up under modern scrutiny. I mean, people's tastes change. So
Right. And we do have, when you get into theater, we've got a lot of technical, and you've got all kinds of experts and consultants that will be brought in for sound and for
All sorts of things. The acoustical consultants, along with, specifically for theater, you get into the overall shell design, but when you talk to the acoustical consultants, that's when you really get into the design of the theater, because the performance really happens on the interior, and where the way that the interior volume acts is essential in something and how successful it'll be, and so the consultants are big.
And was it on this tape or the other tape where we talked about the organ not being really appropriate for this space?
I can't remember now, but I have been told in this particular space that it's dead sound.
Mm. Yeah, it's sort of hiding back in the apse there, and I don't know how good acoustically that. It doesn't look like the space was designed for sound really, and in using something like this, the design acoustically would have to, if this were to be retrofitted into a new space or a new space designed around it, it would have to be respective of what sound it can produce.
Yeah, because the organ, as I understand it, was not designed for the building. I mean, the building was not designed for an organ of this type. The organ was added later, I'm sure, as a gift. Some of the old references to, let's say the compulsory chapel services that were a part of Parsons' life up until, 1950 something, 56, I think. The faculty would sit on a raised dais facing the students, and the reference was in ornate oak chairs with the most important faculty members in the middle, and then they kind of frittered off to the side in terms of their status in the pecking order, the academic pecking order. Well, obviously those ornate oak chairs aren't there anymore, so my guess is that was more of a ceremonial area rather than designed for an organ. Also, the ceiling is painted white and plastered, and my guess is that it had the beaded wainscoted insert between the ceiling beams, like the ceiling of the nave has.
It looks to me like that's what it was.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like a 1960s retrofit.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get rid of that old-fashioned stuff and make it clean and modern.
Well, while our camera is focusing up there, let's walk up to the front and see if there are any other things that we've talked about identifying to save. I know we talked about even these funny little lights, fixtures up above. I don't know.
Well,
What are those?
These are kind of cool.
actually, they
Look
are cool.
space age.
Yeah, they do
little
look space age.
saucers
They
or
are Art Deco, and I actually, the more I look at them, the more I like them. But I would have to date them to really find out, how to utilize them. And it's if you're going to end up using parts of Barhydt, then you would probably want something that's recognizable. And a lot of times people don't really notice them, even though they're cool.
Well, I could see where they would maybe be nice in a meeting room.
Mm-hmm.
The old fixtures, ceiling fixtures at the high school in the auditorium, the ones in the main auditorium have been covered up by the new lowered ceiling, but there's still some of the recessed fixtures under the balcony, and they're very similar to that. So my guess is that those are from the 30s or maybe the 40s, but that's
Okay.
just a guess. I mean, who knows? Because they certainly don't look like 1912, 5, whatever 8. Whatever year this was built, I can never remember.
And even, we'll walk up here and we'll take a
Yeah, 'cause we
quick,
haven't looked at the windows for this program.
yeah,
This
let's
is
take
like, for the
a quick
viewing-
break for our cameraman. I think his hands are getting tired. We've talked about preserving this piece, but it's awfully big.
It's big, but we have some big spaces in the proposed design, and if not utilizing this window in the actual performance space, which would be a little difficult, we could probably do it in some of the other large spaces like the convention space and things like that. But one thing that was mentioned before that I'd have to add is this is probably not going to be something that will be used on an exterior surface because of replicating the window and keeping the elements out and the integrity of the window. We might end up just using it on it as an interior piece, maybe backlit, or maybe something that would be in the lobby that we could that people could walk around and relate to. But it's large, but we have some large spaces, and it's just a matter of getting it in there and making it look like it belongs in there.
And it might be nice, like you say, as a partition, if it was lit from both sides,
Mhm.
you'd get double duty from it, which would be good.
Sure.
I was mentioning off camera earlier that even as a little kid, when I first was in here, I thought, boy, these windows do not match. The brilliant red in Christ's robe in the other window, and something about the fineness of detail in the faces is sort of a jarring element when compared with the more subtle coloration of the angels over here on this side. So just for the record, I've never felt like these two worked very well as a pair. Individually, they're beautiful. And I always, as a kid, preferred the rich young ruler window, but I think as an adult, I like this one better now. So
I favor this one also, and for some reason, the red on the right, the big dark piece, bothers me.
oh, the velvet curtain, yeah, and that probably has some symbolic meaning. Now we're talking about a window off camera here, but
And I think our camera is turning around to that window,
Turning over.
and
looking down the nave as we speak.
right, and we're lucky because the window that we like is in better shape than this one. As Richard pans the camera around and looks at it, there are some very bad spots.
As you can see, in some of the spots, there's significant light peeking through our window, and it's probably because it has that southern exposure. But the result is a window that is in much worse shape than the Angels window that we were looking at earlier, and would probably take quite a bit more work to end up reusing it.
Right, it lets a lot of cold air in here, which I'm sure is another problem in heating this, especially this winter, the high heat bills.
And like we've mentioned in the other tape, when we looked at the windows, the came is sagging in places. I mean, the whole structure of the window is shifted because of the shift in the structure of the foundation of the building. So that's going to create a more delicate situation as far as removing the window and restoring it in the first place.
Some of our people with the Civic Center have talked with Ron Bovard on removing this, and I believe it was said that the smaller windows on the sides could be taken out in as little as 10 minutes, but these big ones are going to, I'm sure, have problems taking them out without breaking, and the pieces will be used from one to repair others, and we're lucky that we have Ron Bovard in Fairfield, who's an expert in redoing old church windows.
And they're both beautiful windows. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, they're both very attractive, but as a pair, I just think they don't quite match. Maybe that's what Millard Roberts didn't like. It's hard to say.
Right.
You know how sensitive he was.
Right. We're out in front, and we have talked about saving elements from here.
One of the things we were talking about earlier was some of the stonework that's on the exterior. And given that it won't really crumble when the building is being taken apart, hoping that some of it would be salvageable, we've talked about using not only parts of the rough stone, but even the smoother limestone elements surrounding the plaques and surrounding the entryway with the keystone and such. We've talked about using. How we would use them is another question, but it's such nice material that it's something you just can't pass up. It's like the windows in that regard.
And here again, it could be an interior element. It wouldn't have to be outside.
Right.
You could have
Exactly.
your like your entryway, and then this would be the archway that would lead into the auditorium, like if it's the Barhydt Memorial
Sure.
Community, whatever.
Sure.
Right, right.
Possibilities are endless, really. I mean, the possibilities, interior, exterior, if it's a part of the building, part of the facade, or like a fountain, piece.
And
it's
just in the
endless.
fact that it's a very American thing to tear down a wonderful building like this, it's also a very European thing to utilize pieces of distant, structures. Like Kelsey was talking about when he was in Italy, and in Rome, and everywhere you have little bits and pieces of older buildings that are stuck into walls.
It was typical when I was over there. I actually saw a number of churches that utilized portions of other churches to resurrect it, and to build themselves. And so, it's a typical practice. And so,
I guess we're finally getting old enough that we can start doing that.
Yeah,
We should be
yeah.
doing that, and
And we're getting old enough that we are beginning to appreciate what's gone before. I know there was a church that I was really fascinated with in Brussels when I was there a few years ago I think Susan and I went there about 4 times, because it was right from our hotel on the way to something else we went to several times. But there were bombed out sections from the Napoleonic Wars, and they just left it all scarred and messed up inside, big craters in the wall and the remnants of a big Gothic arch. But in concert with some very modern installations within that church itself. So it is possible to make a pastiche out of bits and pieces of the past and still make it work and make it functional and visually interesting.
another issue might be of utilizing something that's obviously old with new construction. And a lot of times you'll find that it will be questioned, but eventually you'll see that there's beauty in contrast, where you use like an older an older element from an older building that's obviously not new construction, but when put in a new construction ends up creating beauty.
Like the Temple of Dendur at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. Thousands of years old, crusty as all get out, chipped and broken and icky by our standards, but it's in a real clean, modern context on that wing of the museum, and it looks really quite handsome, even though it's broken and shattered in that pristine modern context. So it's workable. Maybe not what we would wish for in this situation, but I think we need to make the best of an unfortunate situation that we can.
right, and that's what the Civic Center is hoping to do by helping preserve, save some of the elements of Barhydt Chapel, including
Including the plaques.
Including
the
plaques.
plaques and recognizable elements like not only the plaques but also the cornerstone down here stating what date it was actually built. And it's this sort of history that will make people remember, and it gives a depth to what's being recreated.
And I think I might have said 1908, but the cornerstone says 1910. So maybe 1908 is when they got the cash together. Who knows?
right, completed the deal. So thank you, Mark and Kelsey.
It's Kelsey.
I'm saying the name. Look at the wrong person here.
He's young. I'm old.
Nah. Thank you very much for this program, brainstorming, looking at Barhydt, possibly combining the old with the new, preserving a part of our heritage in a new vision that we have for our community. Thank you.
Thank you.